because we'd started doing BBC work, like instantly the ability to go out there and pitch like corporate gigs, like having, if people say to you, hey, when, can I see some of your work? And you're like, watch BBC Two at 9:00, and they're like, oh wow, like that qualifies you for being in. Like, there's a certain level of capability if your work's going to be on TV, I guess. So we just were introduced to Aston Martin by someone we'd done some work with locally, and he was like, oh, my friend I was in school with runs the Aston Martin racing team, and he's so do you want to go up to the headquarters and meet them and see if we can get them to get us to do some documentary work for them.
Our guest today is Rhys Waters. Rhys is a media professional with over 20 years of experience in broadcast and digital media. He's worked as an executive producer, director, editor, and host for television, radio, and podcasts. Rhys has a laundry list of accomplishments to his name, including showrunning the BAFTA-winning primetime comedy factual hybrid Rod Gilbert's work experience for the BBC for a decade. He also launched and developed the quirky and niche podcast The Unexplainers, growing it into a TV, radio, and stage show. Additionally, Rhys turned a lockdown boredom project, Canadian Politics is Boring, into one of Canada's biggest weekly satirical comedy podcasts. In 2018, Rhys moved to Canada and launched Podstarter, a podcast production company which he runs alongside his business partner, Jonathan Burns. In this podcast, we chat about how his ADHD and dyslexia affect his creativity, filming mini-docs for Aston Martin in the south of France, working for the BBC, and how he turned his love for podcasting into a business. Rhys is a testament to the idea that hard work can get you anywhere. This is the Ilienfero podcast. Now, without further ado, here's Rhys Waters.
Person.
I know.
It's really weird.
Yeah. So do you do Canadian Politics is Boring in person?
Usually we like to, because we think we have more fun. Like the chemistry tends to be a bit more like I don't know. When you're in a room and you're like this, you're kind of like making eye contact, having fun. I think like when you're on like doing remote stuff, sometimes you can get distracted by tabs and anything else that's going on. So we started off doing a remote recording because we started it during the pandemic, but we try and be in the studio as much as we can. Although Jesse's thinking of moving, so we'll end up being remote again. But I do like the energy of being in person. You get to mess around a bit more. So.
Definitely. Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. I found especially too, like there's sometimes, I think there's been 2 episodes where we've had this weird kind of lag between, so you're almost like, you're always like, is he still talking, or can I start? Can I not start? And then it just becomes a sorry.
And like the thing is with me and Jesse as well, we both got ADHD, so we both overstep each other. One of us will talk, the other one would have ignored the other. There's a lot of like chaotic energy in our episodes, and I think that the chemistry is better in person, whereas we are just overstepping each other on a Zoom call otherwise. So it kind of makes more sense in person, kind of to have that kind of like the chaos is fun then. So
do you find that there's a lot of people with ADHD in the industry?
I don't know. maybe there is. I guess I think maybe it's that kind of like square peg, and the creative industry is a bit more accommodating to square pegs, maybe. So maybe that's a reason why. But I think typically you do find there is like more neurodivergent people in creative fields. But I met like a bunch of people who were like in other fields as well and seem to be doing fine. So I don't know.
The only reason I ask is because I know like I always find people with ADHD like have such a fascinating way of thinking about things sometimes, in like a good way.
That's one way of putting it. Yeah. That's a nice way to put it.
Where it's like, you're like, I did not think of it that way. It's like, maybe let's try it out. And I feel like, especially in like the creative space, where you're like, let's try random things and see kind of what sticks. It's like, I think it's a very good thing to have. But I'm sure at the same time, it could also probably not be the best thing. But
it's worked to my advantage. Like I only recently found out about it, but I've known about. I've had good I've known about dyslexia for the last 20 years because I got diagnosed when I was in college, and I'd always put down. I know that like the way I do work, I can't do like 9 till 5. Like it depends when it's flowing, when it's not, that kind of thing. I know a lot of people like that in creative fields, but I guess like for me, I do approach things from a slightly different perspective, but only because I was in school, my teachers would say, well, he did solve that thing, but he didn't do it the way we asked him to. He kind of like did this and then that and then worked around. And I think like you do get people who, you do kind of have to build your own roadmap sometimes because your brain doesn't go the logical way. So I think, yeah, people in creative fields, because they've done that their whole lives or since they were kids, maybe they do kind of filter down to these fields for that reason alone, I guess. So
very interesting.
Do you actually? I think I watched I think it was like a podcast clip or something. They were talking about how people who are dyslexic think differently than people who who aren't, who can read normally. It's like you think, and maybe I could just be bullshitting here, but I think the example they gave was like if you're thinking about something, you're just seeing images in your brain rather than like the words.
Yeah.
And that's the reason that if you're actually reading, like the letters don't register in your brain.
Well, I stopped doing like written schoolwork on like exam. Like in the UK, you can leave school when you're 16. So I stopped doing kind of written exam work and stuff roughly at that age, and I went to like art school full time. So I was drawing and painting and doing more visual work because that was where my strength was. So you're like, it kind of like lines up exactly with that. And then I managed to get into film school, and the reason I did my test for dyslexia was because I had to write like a 20,000 word dissertation about a film topic or a documentary topic, because it was a documentary film school, and I think that was the thing that made me need help, because I was like, I can't do this.
Torture.
So I had like someone like sit with me and go through the plan and like go, hey, they broke it down into chunks for me and help me kind of. I don't think I could have written it without that support. So whereas with the visual side of things, I find myself working in like, say it's like video editing, or whether it's even editing audio and you're looking at waveforms, because it's like a visual representation. I tend to find I can work really quickly and like have like hyperfocus and, feel really comfortable. Whereas written word, I used to drive people crazy because like if I was doing a project, they'd be like, can we get a script? I'm like, no, I'm just going to go and do it. And they'd be like, no, we like to sign off on a script. I'm like, well, can you sign off on some bullet points and like some things that you definitely don't want me to do? Because I just don't do scripts, and some people hate that, especially if they want control over a project. And I think that's always been my way of working, was to go out and just kind of like, tell the story and, as the story emerged, pull things from it and then control it in the edit and, tailor it from there. I guess you just find your own way of working, and it doesn't always gel with everybody, I guess. So.
That's interesting, because I'm actually watching a show right now, and the head, there's like, it's like a detective show, and the detective is he's got dyslexia, and he won't take notes.
Yeah.
Everything's voice recorded, because he can't, like, he won't be able to read it after. So he's just walking around like the crime scene being like, yeah, whatever, like it's a bloody mess, and like there's 14 bullet holes, and people are like, hey, can you, it's like, have a little respect for the victim here. And he's just like, I'm just taking notes, man.
Yeah, that's how I take my notes.
Yeah.
They did give me that's what they gave me for lectures, was like an old school like audio recorder as well, because I'm old. But like they gave me an audio recorder to kind of like capture stuff. But I think like even so, like most of my work has been like documentary or improv stuff or interview based, and I think that's just where you kind of gravitate towards the stuff you feel where your strengths are, I guess. So I don't know whether I gravitated because it was my strengths or it's because that was the only way I could work. I don't know, but whichever, it was fine.
So, like, I feel like now it's probably such a good time if you have dyslexia, in terms of the fact, like, you have YouTube, you have audiobooks, like, you have all these forms of media that are not just writing. I feel like I remember listening to a podcast as well a while back, and it was a guy who also had dyslexia and started a company because he was bothering his mom for a very long time, and he was like, Mom, can you read me Harry Potter? And she's like, sure, but it takes time and all that stuff. Yeah. And then he ended up making her audio into, or making her like reading into audiobooks, and then he would like speed them up a lot. And then he ended up listening to things at like 2-3 speed. And then he ended up starting like a company that's pretty much specialized in helping people like deal and learn like with dyslexia through audio. And I think it's such a fascinating time for that.
I found like one of my big passion, one of the big reasons I have so much passion about podcasting is that like since I started listening to podcasts, you know, like I don't know, maybe like 10 years ago, my ability to learn and like, you know, learn about new topics and everything, because I literally haven't read my wife is always, she laughs at me because I buy books all the time because I'm like, I really want to read this book. It's really interesting. And I had somebody send me a book they'd written and I really want to read it. It's fascinating. But I really struggle to like, I'll read the same page like 4 or 5 times and I'm like, I don't know what I just read. I don't retain it. And, but then weirdly I can read out loud without making many mistakes, but without processing what I've read, I can just vocalize the words, but my brain doesn't connect in my brain always. Is really strange kind of relationship to have with the words on the page. But because of that kind of barrier, like podcasts have allowed me to kind of like, you know, history, politics, economics, you know, anything that I'm interested in, there is like a ton of content out there, and that's what drew me towards it. And before that, I did used to listen to audiobooks, because, you know, the old audio, like, used to get them on cassette or CD, that kind of thing. So, you know, even then it was like still a really kind of a useful tool, definitely. And I think that like the fact that there is so much content out there is incredible, especially for accessibility from that point of view. And I feel like even things like reading on my phone as well, like with you can change the color of the background in the text, and sometimes that helps too. So I did read like the whole of Lord of the Rings trilogy on my phone years ago, but I found a setting of the color and the size of the font and the background that I was like, this is better, you know. So it was really strange. It's like
that's so interesting.
Yeah.
Why Lord of the Rings out of all books?
When I was a kid, my dad always used to read me The Hobbit like 3 times or something. So I was like, I want to read the other one now as well. The kind of the rest of the series. So
a man of refined taste.
Yeah.
Ben actually has a full tattoo.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Lord of the Rings.
Amazing.
Right here, yeah. I'm a big fan of you.
Yeah.
You can tell.
Actually, we've been preparing for the podcast, and you know, Ben was like, "How can we go all the way in?" So you got a tattoo.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Did I accidentally end up in a Lord of the Rings podcast?
Yeah, where I'm the only one who knows about anything.
I mean, I've watched them.
Have you watched them?
Yeah, multiple times.
Oh yeah. That's interesting.
He didn't even know this about me.
Yeah.
What kind of business partner is that?
Exactly.
So going back to art school and directing. So you started directing when you were 19.
Yeah.
How can you talk a bit about that world? How you got into it, first of all, so young, and also with directing, it's like, for example, for us, you have to write director's treatments, like there's so much writing involved. So how did you get around that with all the challenges that you faced?
So one of the things, like, especially when I was younger, I guess I still am, like, super ambitious, but also like my mindset has been, because I can't write it down, I would just go, well, I'll make it and then I'll show it to you. And that was always my methodology. So when I was at the film school, which was Newport Film School, it had a really reputable documentary film course that doesn't even exist anymore. They'd only take like 12 people on a year for the course. It was super small. But what happened was a BBC producer came in to talk to students, and he was basically, right, we're doing these series of TV ads that are about public health and safety, about alcohol and alcohol consumption, because at the time there was this big binge drinking kind of culture. It still exists, but they cared about it for a moment back then when I was in film school. And he was like, right, you know, we've got some of our budget we're spending on this and this, but we also thought it'd be fun to give some students and some young filmmakers the opportunity to go out there and make some films, but we're looking for you to do something different. Don't do your standard thing. So this was like this lecture that we had, and he was like, you know, and we'll pitch ideas to me when I'm back next time. So I at the time I had like just a home video camera because I'd like worked in like Currys, which is like the British version of Best Buy, like all through Christmas. I'd done like a ton of extra hours and I saved it. I bought a camera and I was making, on mini DV tapes, all my projects were being shot on this. So I went to, this doesn't exist anymore because they changed the law, but in the UK they used to have kick out time. So all the pubs would kick out at exactly the same time. So it would be like 10 o'clock, pubs closed, and the streets would just be full of all these really drunk people fighting and like...
Is there a reason why they did it?
That was just the law. Like, you couldn't drink in a pub until after a certain time. And they've relaxed it now because they were trying to go, well, but it was you can imagine it was chaos. Yeah. Like, imagine all the bars in downtown Halifax kicked out at the same time. And, and everyone was like loaded. It would just be chaos. So that happened like every night, pretty much. So I was like, do you know what? I think this would make a great nature program. So I got in my car and I hid and I just basically filmed like people like falling around and like the stuff they were doing and all, just being drunk. Like, and then I edited it together and I got my friend who had like a posh English accent. So I was like, hey, he sounds a bit like David Attenborough. And I basically wrote a narration like script for him. And then he then read it and I edited it together. So it was basically a nature program, but the subject matter was just really drunk people all like falling over each other, fighting, eating food or trying to eat food, falling asleep in the corner of like next to a dumpster. And then I just gave it to him to the producer and was like, hey, I did it. And he was like, I want it. So it was like, that's literally how I ended up doing it then. And then, so we obviously had to re-edit it. We had to blur the faces of everybody. We had to kind of get it, go through and get like the audio mixed. But it went out as part of the campaign then as well. So it was like, I had an opportunity and then kind of was just like, right, what can I do that's completely different? So that was my that was how it happened. So
how long did that take? Like, did you go out for multiple weeks, nights? Was it just like one night?
It was over 2 nights, I think. And I went out like half an hour before kick-out time, and then I stayed there for a good like hour or two. But I did it from the safety of inside my car in the dark because I was like, I'm not going to go out there. I'm going to get massacred.
Probably.
Exactly. So.
Wow. That's so wild. Was it?
What was the reaction of the producer when he first saw it?
Yeah,
I don't think he was expecting it, but he was like, "I've spoken to like legal people. We have to blur their faces, but we can definitely put it out there." And then they gave us like a license fee, so it was like I think it was like £65, which is like $80. Yeah. It was like, hey, here's a broadcast like license fee for us to put your film out there. So I've still got that because I was like, it's the first time I made some money from TV kind of thing. So it was it was a fun. For whatever reason, he was crazy enough to let it go on TV for me. So and it ran for a few nights. Like they played a bunch of them, and there were some other student projects got selected too as well. So yeah.
So how long was the
like
piece?
30 seconds in the end.
Okay.
It was like super short.
For some reason, I thought it was like a short documentary. It was like a 15-minute piece. It's like 2 days. Like how many drunk people are there?
I just like I would like the first night I got some crazy stuff, but then I went to a different town, which had a worse reputation, and then I got even crazier stuff. So it was like, I think the second night made up most of the videos. So
that's funny. Do you know? Can you still recall the name of the town?
Oh yeah, the first one was my hometown Blackwood, and then the second one was Pontypridd, where I got family who live there.
And that's in Wales, right?
It's in Wales. Both of them are in Wales. They're like, kind of like working class communities, but like post-industrial working class communities. So a lot of drinking goes on, a lot of partying. It's kind of like very similar to Irish drinking culture in Wales. So
what's your favorite part about Wales?
My favorite part of Wales or my favorite thing about Wales?
Both.
I would say, like, I'm not going to go with an obvious choice. I was going to say Snowdon, or Wylfa, as it's called. Like, Snowdon was a name given by the English and is reverted back to the kind of the original Welsh name of Wylfa, which is like the highest mountain there. Incredible if you're up on a clear day. But I'm not going to say that. I'm going to say there's an area called the Gower, in South Wales near Swansea, that is just this peninsula, but is surrounded by like amazing beaches and cliffs and things. and there's like surfing there. There's like wild ponies. Is incredible.
Oh, that's cool.
I'd say that's probably my favorite part. My favorite thing about Wales is how, I guess, is the psyche in Wales is that no one, you don't get many people who are kind of full of themselves. If they are full of themselves, they instantly get torn down by, people like, what are you driving a Range Rover for? I know where you grew up. It was that kind of approach. Everyone's kind of very down to earth, and like there's people don't tend to get, if you start to get a bit high and mighty and a bit on a pedestal, people are ready just to laugh and make really good jokes at your expense and kind of remind you where you came from. So I like that kind of part of the psyche. So
that's great. I just want to jump back a little bit to the directing stuff. So when you said like, was that project that you did, was that the one you directed when you were 19, or is that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So where did you go from there? Like, what was next for you?
God, I'm just trying to think. So that was like literally my first or second year in film school, and it was a 3-year course. And then for my graduation film, I came up with an idea. It was me trying to sell my soul to pay off my student debt. And the idea was we're like, hey, let's look at religion in a fun way. What is the soul? And like, is it a real thing? And then, so it was kind of like a pseudo documentary. There was like some bits were true, some bits weren't. I interviewed like a Buddhist priest. I interviewed like a bishop and like a bunch of different people.
And did you find them like in Wales?
Yeah, they were just like kind of like local people around and everything.
Interesting.
But they were really interested. It was like, hey, what does the soul mean to your religion? And like, they were really, in fairness to them, they were kind of great. And then, so I was working on that, and one of my lecturers mentioned to someone in I was in a really lucky to be in a film school where the lecturers were actually still making stuff. So my lecturer at the time, he was like quite a respected documentary maker. He directed. This was when advertising money was still big money. In the early 90s, he directed one McDonald's ad and paid his mortgage off. So back in the day when you could, when the money was like,
right,
it's a very different kind of world now. But he'd mentioned to someone, like, they were like, oh, well, any projects, and they were working in BBC development, and they were like, oh, we're trying to find a way of making more religious programming or spiritual programming that is aimed at a younger audience. And like, I'm not religious, I just thought it was quite an interesting topic to explore, and like, I did have student debt because it was going into my 3rd year, so I thought it was timely. And they were like, how would you like to develop this for a TV show? And then that led to us, myself and someone I was working with at the time, Nathan, who I kind of co-founded my old business in the UK with, and we worked together on like a lot of TV projects. He's an incredible like DOP and camera person who we kind of teamed up together, and me and him, we were lucky enough to get our foot in the door there. We kind of went in for a few weeks to kind of develop the idea, and then they were like, and we've got these other ideas, and we go, we'll go and shoot some taster tapes, and we'll just make some. And we kind of like, at the time, like the department we went to was quite creaky, and they had like a lot of older people, and they were like being told all the time, you need to invest in younger talent. So the timing was right. One of the problems we did face was that it was like an old school department where the editors only edited, the directors and the producers never touched any equipment. The camera people were the camera people, and you don't touch those lights, and we came from that generation of, hey, we got Final Cut Pro 5, and we're going to shoot stuff and we're going to edit ourselves. We're going to shoot stuff and we're going to edit ourselves, and we're going to just do everything and we'll make it. And like, there was a bit of kind of a generational culture clash, because it was still at a time when you had those clearly defined roles. And at the time I was really kind of frustrated about it. I was like, just let us make stuff, and why can't we do this ourselves? Why do we have to use the process? But kind of as you mature, you realize that at that time, when people had the luxury of specializing, there was a lot of real expert knowledge because they filled that specialist role. But back then I was just like this impatient, like early 20-year-old kind of like,
it's like, I can do the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. I can do it all. It's fine. But then, as you grow and you go, do you know what? There were some real experts there, and like, the the kind of those defined roles. I don't know whether that'll exist again in TV. I know it does exist in like big films, but depending on the size budget project you're working on. I think that it was an amazing opportunity though, because I'd always wanted to work at the BBC, and then I was there, kind of in the building and kind of in Cardiff in the TV centre that doesn't exist anymore. They've knocked it down. It looked like the Rebel base. It was this big like 1960s concrete building. But within a year, I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm going to be working at the BBC. And within a year, I was like, I never want to work at the BBC again, because it was an institution. It was quite a stuffy British institution. They were like, if you sit at that desk for 5 years, then in 5 years' time you'll be at that desk, and then this desk. And at the time, YouTube was like just a thing that had kind of not. It was still quite new.
It's like around 2005.
Yeah. So it was only a year or two old, and like, so I was like, we should just. And I actually during like college, I'd started to post and had a YouTube channel. I can't remember the exact number. I had just around 200 subscribers, and I was the 12th most subscribed comedian on YouTube. My channel was a comedy channel.
That's crazy.
And then I got busy and I just kind of left it, and I was like, I should have stuck. I could have stuck with that. I would have missed opportunity. But then
could have been Joe Rogan now.
I know. So, and then I decided to just kind of go freelance, be independent, and teamed up with Nathan. We started to, we'd still like built good relationships and like done some good work when we were at the BBC. So we were then pitching independently. And one of the shows when we were done Inside was when we were still there was a show with a comedian called Rod Gilbert, and it was called Rod Gilbert's Teen Tribes, and he was like pushing 40 at the time, and it was him investigating weird teen tribes, essentially. Like emos were big at the time, and he just hung out with emos for a few days, and it was like, hey, what's this all about? And went to listen to some bands, and it was kind of like a weird attempt at like a I suppose like hey, let's uncover this subculture. And it kind of, it was, there were aspects of it that worked and aspects that didn't, but it just stayed as a pilot. And then we went back and we really liked working with Rod, and we'd had good fun together, and we developed a good process. It was the wrong idea. And then we pitched a show called Rod Gilbert's Work Experience, which was basically him as a comedian. People would tell him, you've got the toughest job in the world. And he was like, no, I don't. There's people, I love my job. I get to make people laugh. Times is difficult. It's not always easy. It's nerve-wracking, but there are certainly people out there doing much harder jobs than me. And that was the show, really. He'd then go and try hard jobs that he thought were harder. And I must have been about 24, 25. And they were like, yes, but you're young, so we're going to team you up with this production company. They're going to be like the people who oversee it and mentor you, and you can make the program, and you can edit it, and you can do all that stuff if you really want to, but we're going to have like a safe pair of hands watching over you as you go, which was sensible,
Pretty fair.
Exactly. And then we managed to get successfully pitch a season, which is British TV. You do 4 episodes to a season. So it's a series.
There's a reason why 4.
That's just how they do it. They tend to do shows in like smaller chunks for some reason. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, I feel like everything in North America is like
bigger.
Yeah, like more. Like
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I think the show. I honestly think like if they said, "Hey, 26 episodes," I would have been like, we would have run out of, because the whole run we made about 35 episodes. I think maybe 40 episodes over 8 years. I couldn't imagine doing that in 1 year, like the first year. So, yeah.
So how when you were around like 16, 17, like did you always want to be a director? Were you always into film, or did you have an idea of like, I don't know, I want to be an astronaut and I landed in film? It's like, what was the vision like for you when you were that young?
I knew, like, I did art. I went to art college because I knew I wanted to do something that was like either painting or draw. Like I love doing, I haven't done it for years, but I need to get back into it. Just life drawing, just drawing people, and like we did ceramics, we did photography, like in a dark room, like the old school, which was fun. I missed that. It was
the cool way.
Yeah, the cool way. Like we were doing it, and ironically, it was just a long time ago. So like it was the kind of thing where I knew I wanted to do something that was visual and creative, because I felt like that's where I could thrive, I guess. But I was really into movies as a kid. There was this thing called Real Cool Cinema Club when I was like 10 or 11, and it was like, I think it was £1, so like less than $2 to go and watch a movie every Saturday morning. And it wasn't like the latest stuff, but they'd play stuff like Princess Bride or Bill and Ted, and you just go and you just every Saturday morning you'd go out, you'd like watch whatever was there. Sometimes it would be something like Secret Garden, or like, you never knew what you were going to watch. And I used to do that every Saturday morning as a kid. It was like this old miners' institute, this big old building with like a Victorian theatre, and they just had a projector in there, and they just play movies in there, which was cool. And so like I was always into it. And then the thing that made me really into filmmaking was I was up late one night and Evil Dead 2 was on. Like the BBC always used to do late night movies, so you get to like, they'd have the last like news at like 11 o'clock or something, and they go, and tonight's late night movie is Evil Dead 2. And then so I watched it blew my mind. And then a few years later I saw it on DVD, because DVDs were suddenly a thing, and I watched the extras about how they made it, and like the cost, like how they built like the costumes and the makeup, and like how they achieved different shots and special effects, and that was what really got me into it. And I know like it's not like high class, it's like for me it was like the perfect blend of like horror and comedy, but also creative thinking in terms of how can we pull these shots off, and also how Sam Raimi basically convinced his high school to let him turn the gymnasium into a studio for the summer, because no one's using it, and they'd build the set in the gymnasium, and like I loved it. I loved the but also that they were doing stuff with not much, because like I said, I was shooting on like a home movie camera doing my films, so I could really relate to those kind of more guerrilla film tactics, and kind of like really sparked something in my head then.
That's fascinating. And I know you talk a lot about like comedy. Have you ever done a comedy show? Set? Yeah. I've done. It's weird because like a lot of the stuff I've done is like a blend of comedy and documentary. Yeah. So like obviously Rod was, most of the time that show was played for laughs, and we'd try and get it. If he was going to be a teacher, for instance, we took the time to find real characters, or a school that was full of good characters. So a lot of the time people were really funny, and he just, as a comedian, he just bounce off them and tease them, and he encouraged them, and the idea was that they would be the stars. So like it was kind of almost like improvised comedy, but with real people being encouraged by a comedian. So it was kind of like high risk, but we always had so much fun doing it. And then a lot of the work that I've done has typically been like instilled with improv and comedy. I did the first podcast I ever made was called The Unexplainers, and it's kind of like a cult hit. It was in the UK and the US. It was for the BBC, and it was. And when would that have been?
That was about 2014.
Wow, so that's like early podcast.
Yeah. And it was a radio show originally, and then we were like, it was also a podcast because the BBC would do both, and it was a comedian called Mike Bubbins, a comedian called John Rutledge, who I still kind of do work with now today, and they would go and try and solve mysteries, and it was like a road trip. It was like it was always out in the field. It was never in a studio or kind of like this. They were always in a car driving to like where a UFO crashed or where someone saw Bigfoot, and all these kind of like crazy stories. But it was fun because they would always improvise. One of them believed, one of them didn't. So they were always arguing with each other. And it was fun. It was one of those shows that it was, we did like 4 series of it, I think, in total. And it's still online. You can still listen to it and everything. But it was like a really off the wall, but like so off the wall that we built this kind of like cult following. And people do still ask today, like, when are you going to do more? Oh, wow. When are you going to do more? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, but I checked the feed. The feed is, no episodes have been posted for years, but it still gets like 3,000 downloads a month. Oh wow! Just by word of mouth, or like people re-listening, even though like the show has been dead for so long, which is crazy.
That's fascinating. So going back to your directing days, so you did some stuff with Aston Martin, right?
Yes.
Like some mini docs. Can you how does that work? How did you learn that when you were that young?
How do you go from wondering about where the soul comes from.
So
where the engine comes from.
Do you know, it was a weird thing. So because we'd started doing BBC work, like instantly the ability to go out there and pitch like corporate gigs, like having, if people say to you, hey, when can I see some of your work, and you're like, watch BBC Two at 9 o'clock, and they're like, oh wow, like that qualifies you for being like, there's a certain level of capability if your work's going to be on TV, I guess. So we just were introduced to Aston Martin by someone we'd done some work with locally, and he was like, oh, my friend I was in school with runs the Aston Martin racing team, and he's so do you want to go up to the headquarters and meet them and see if we can get them to get us to do some documentary work for them? So we drove up to the Aston Martin factory near Reading in England, and it's like incredible. Like they hand build the cars there, but like the factory is like this crisp, like white tiles and immaculate. And at the time there was these like bright pink leather seats that were being put together with like an emblem embossed in them, and it was like a Saudi princess had ordered them. It was like incredible kind of place to be. The thing with like that project was we were like, okay, so can we do some videos for you? And they were like, yeah, okay, we'll try you out. They were like, how about we cover all your costs, and we're testing our new prototype for the Le Mans race at this Paul Ricard circuit in the south of France in Nice. We don't really have a lot of money, but we can at least cover your costs to go there. And I was like, yeah, we're going. so we had a long weekend in the south of France filming this incredible prototype car. Like we were in an Audi Q8, like with the boot open, I'm being British, the trunk open, and like lead on our stomachs, like filming while this race car trailed us and overtook, and we'd like, it was incredible. And like we did a good enough job with that they were like, okay, cool. Well, in a 6 months time, we're doing the 24-hour race, an endurance race in the Nürburgring in Germany. And we were like, and this is a paid gig, and we have more money this time. And then we did like 3 or 4 films for them in the end. And then like this big London agency took on like their whole PR and comms. I mean, we were like little guys who got muscled out, but while it lasted, it was great because we were just, you had the factory teams from like BMW, Mercedes, Toyota, all these people from around the world like flying in to race and to be in the pits, with all this kind of like incredible like technology, and then full of VIPs, people there who would like sponsored the car, and it was a surreal world. It was like hanging out with like the 1% for a while, because like race cars in Europe, it's like the hobby. Like, oh, I pay for this race team, I'm going to go and watch them and sit in the car and everything.
You don't?
What, you don't do that?
Yeah, exactly.
You don't have a car in this race?
No, exactly. So, but yeah, it was total chance. Someone had suggested, and then we just like chased the opportunity. And like, I mean, I know some people would go, no, and I'm not doing that just for cost. I don't know anyone who would say I'm just doing that for cost, but I can imagine some people would. But
I would have totally done that.
I know.
Yeah.
And it didn't cost
how could you pass up that opportunity?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's one of those where it's like when you're not in that world is so fascinating to the point where you're like, it's like if you cover like even like 60%, I'll think about it.
Exactly.
Well, the thing that I find interesting too about like the space that we're in is the fact that like you do have those opportunities, like for us, for example, like this isn't nearly on the same scale, but a couple of years ago we saw that someone was going to be doing a race, like he was trying to run 100
a few less horsepower than yours.
Yeah. But he was trying to run out like 176 kilometers in less than 24 hours. And it was like, damn, that sounds cool. And we ended up getting the chance to shoot it. Which was like, it was a really, really cool experience. We got to make a cool piece out of it. I mean, obviously it wasn't paid or anything, but it was just like the situations that you get thrown into when you're in this world is just kind of bananas. Like you never know what's around the corner.
But those opportunities though as well, if you know it's an interesting story and it's going to make a cool film, and also because they're not paying you, you don't really have a client. You get to flex your creative muscles and go, well, let's just do something different and fun, or like try some stuff out that we've never tried or always wanted to. And then in my experience, when you do that, it always leads to more paid work, whether it's with that person or not is irrelevant. It's typically, oh, I saw that film you did, and like, or it was like completely like, I didn't expect that, and it was fun. And you know, I've never known those films to not be worth the effort, because they end up usually being like the thing you want to show people. So it's like
That is very true.
you know,
Yeah.
and I think that like, and again, coming back to the attitude of like, sometimes you've got to build things to prove people they've got to do it. You know, going down that route, you know, just proving your own skills, your own abilities, and showing like what you can put together is so important, I think, because just pitching people all the time with no evidence of work is. I'm one of those people who believes that if you do good work, then like people will come to you, and people will, because they'll hear your work, or people will talk about the good work or what it's like to work with you, those kind of things. So from that point of view, it's like taking that opportunity just makes total sense. So like,
Oh, totally. And how do you go from that to producing podcasts? What was where was that in between?
so I guess like I'd been doing BBC work for a few years, and then, you know, got into podcasting like 2014, and then I really enjoyed doing the podcasting side of work. And then when I came to Canada like 5 years ago, I initially had a job as a producer at a film company here, but I hadn't worked for any since that like first year at the BBC. I'd never worked for anybody else. I'd always been like independent and freelance, and it wasn't for me. So I then was kind of once again freelance again, but in a country where I had no connections. I didn't know anybody, and was kind of doing the odd video project, and did some small scale kind of like, but mainly editing. I was like mainly just going, well, I can, you know, I'll focus on editing as my skill. So I was doing a lot of editing work. But I was Jonathan Burns, who I've kind of started Podstar with. He comes out of the virtual reality space. He was doing it, I think he did like virtual reality stuff when Man of Steel, the film, was released. So he was working with Warner Brothers to do like, he did stuff with like Marvel and Walmart. So he's got like a really interesting background with the stuff he did. And we were talking about the fact that, hey, podcasting is like, it's coming to like fruition in Canada, but it's a few years behind the UK and the US, where there was already like a very established marketplace and everything there. And I felt like there was a huge opportunity to kind of go, well, I've been doing this for years, so there's an opportunity for us to kind of, you know, jumpstart a company and you know, build something in the podcasting space here with all that kind of preloaded experience, that we can kind of craft something that build a business that is a bit doing interesting things in podcasting in this area. And our business model changed a few times. I guess I kind of like a little bit kind of, we were kind of initially going to just start podcasts and let people free after like 4 or 5 episodes.
Then you realize that doesn't really work.
No, people didn't want that because they were like, because they wouldn't do another episode after we finished. So, and then so now what we do is we have a studio space, but it's just for clients. It's not like a studio for rental. But what we primarily focus on is kind of the launch of podcasts, or the rebranding of podcasts that may have already been running, but they're kind of not getting that traction that they wanted. Then it's kind of audience development. It's kind of developing the concept, and then looking at like frequency of release, duration, the branding, everything. So we kind of like help people launch or relaunch kind of podcasts in that sense. And then there's the day-to-day production, you kind of researching guests or writing episodes and putting them together, and then the post-production and finishing. But then the third aspect would be the kind of promotion and distribution, because obviously if you make a podcast and you don't promote it, you can't expect anyone to listen to it. So a big part of it is that kind of, how do you make sure that it's where people, the kind of niche audience you're looking for, you know, where are they? How do we make sure they access in the podcast, that kind of thing. So
how'd you meet Jonathan in the first place?
we were introduced by a mutual friend, and we just went for a walk. and we talked about a bunch of other stuff. And by like 5 minutes towards the end of the walk, I was like, "Oh, have you thought about doing like podcasts, that kind of thing?" And like we ended up then having a 5 minute chat about it. And then the next time we met up, we were like, "Hey, someone should launch a podcast business." And then I was like, "Well, do you know what? I'm doing a talk. I was doing a talk in Volta called "Why You Shouldn't Start a Podcast," and it was like, "Oh, it was an ironic title about things to think about when you do it." And he was like, "Well, why don't we just launch a company when you do the talk?" So we literally came up with a website and a brand and everything like within the 2 weeks. And then like that talk went from being it was still a talk, but it was also a talk with me going, "And the good news is I've just launched a company." And that was kind of it then. So, and then the pandemic hit just as we signed a lease on an office in downtown. And we then kind of like developed a remote way of working. So we had doorstep kits, so we'd drop microphones off that had been sanitized on doorsteps like locally, and then we were kind of helping people build pillow forts and all those kind of things, or shipping microphones out to wherever people were. But the one thing benefit of that was it allowed us to kind of focus in on the more remote side of the business, meant that we've now got like clients in the US and the UK and kind of across Canada where it's not geographically ring fenced, which is the most exciting part for me, because I'm like, I love the idea of being based here, but also then having that work, much further afield and clients in other places, which is cool.
And how do you go about pitching to clients when it comes to the podcasting world? Because I think it's such a fascinating world that probably not a lot of people know about. That it's like, what is your pitch? Because I know you mentioned that there's not much money in podcasting unless you're kind of in that top 1%.
Yeah.
So what is in it for businesses or other individuals who are looking to start a podcast?
Yeah, like the monetization thing is like a lot of the time, if someone says I'm going to launch a podcast to make a ton of money, it's like I'm going to launch a YouTube channel and make a ton of money, or I'm going to launch an Instagram kind of feed and make a ton of money. It's not a done deal, It's kind of there's a lot of work and chance that goes into it. But I think that for us, it's organizations, businesses, government often have communications issues, and it's like, how do we tell complex stories? And how often is like, how do we boil down this complex issue to a 30-second TV ad? Or, how do we tell these stories? And podcasting is great because it's a platform that encourages in-depth, long-form conversation, exploration of bigger ideas. And it's a good opportunity. So a lot of the time it's us helping organizations solve problems with like a podcast-shaped solution, I guess, where it's like, we need we need to build more of an internal community. We'd like to kind of share more of what's going on within our company. So a podcast is perfect for that, because you can have different people from different departments come on and be guests, and you can release it internally. So it's like no one else can listen unless they're within your company. Or it could be, I'm just thinking like the project we're doing for eBay at the moment is My Hockey Hero. That came about because eBay have like a real commitment to kind of those to diversity and to equality, and they were kind of looking for an opportunity to tell stories that would kind of promote those topics and those kind of issues. And when we pitched to them My Hockey Hero, it came from the host Dean. He's been collecting hockey cards since he was a little kid, but he collected the 100 black and biracial, the black and biracial NHL players who had kind of were the first to kind of break into the league. And his collection was picked up by the NHL. It's toured North America. It's kind of an amazing story. And he was like, I want to start interviewing each of these players because each of them has got like an amazing story. And we decided that might be a good way for eBay to kind of work with us, because he collected all those cards on eBay. So for them, they were like, oh, okay, so this story allows other people, inspires other people to go on eBay and kind of start making their own collections of players who inspire them. But also the stories that we can tell from Dean's collection are inspiring, and, the kind of stories that people need to listen to, especially because like racism in all sport is still an issue, especially in hockey. There's been some really, very recent issues too. So telling that story it kind of resembles a hybrid of a bunch of other projects, but a few things aligned in the right time, and now we're kind of getting to tell these amazing stories. Like the episode that releases soon is Bill Riley. He was the first African Nova Scotian to play in the NHL. He was only the third black player to play in the NHL, and his life, he grew up in Amherst in like rural poverty, and then made it up to play for the Washington Capitals, and he played in Winnipeg as well, and faced some real issues, and especially he played in the minor leagues in the US and faced a lot of racism on a regular basis from stadiums full of people while he was on the ice, and players wanted to fight him all the time, but did it all and kind of like pushed through, and like amazing people who's like I kind of feel like the ability to kind of tell those stories that haven't been told before, but also the ability for people like eBay to then understand the value of how those stories can be told in podcasting, and then invest in them, and then see how their values are shared through that project too, is like I don't know, I think podcasting's a cool place to innovate and kind of come up with those projects, I guess. So
no, I think that's really, really cool, especially because it's one of those where, as you mentioned, there's no, like, if you wanted to make a documentary about that, for example, it's like you'd be putting in so much more money into it that it's like, you're like, is it actually feasible to do while in a podcast form? Like, you can tell this whole massive story of 100 players. Are you planning to do all 100 episodes?
I mean, if the project keeps rolling, we're almost at 10, so we've only been running for like 2 or 3 months, so fingers crossed. But then also as well, I hope like if someone does want to make a film about it, then they can like listen to the podcast and use that as research. Then that's even better. Like, the hope is that these stories are out there, and then people can retell them and interview everyone as well. So it is a really accessible way of telling stories, because it is like send them a link, interview them. Like Bill didn't. We couldn't get his setup working. He just called in, but I love the texture of the phone call in the interview. I just find that it kind of adds like another like documentary element to it. So. That's
funny. How where can people listen to it if they want to listen to it?
My Hockey Hero is like wherever you get your podcasts. If you search that, it should come up. It's got Dean, the host, his daughter drew the artwork, which is, so you'll probably like recognize it's kind of like a homemade kids kind of drawing for the artwork. But yeah.
Oh, that's cool. How's it been doing so far?
Really good. Yeah. I mean, we've been in the top. We've been consistent in the top 100 hockey shows in Canada, and we were at one point we were in the top. I think we hit 40 in hockey shows on Apple, which is great considering it's a brand new show, and the show is getting bigger every week. So we're really happy with it, and there's a bunch of promo stuff about to kick in too. So
wow, that's really cool. And just out of curiosity, because I always like asking people, what was the biggest cultural shock when you moved to Canada from the UK?
I actually talk about this with my wife all the time. So Canadians are really good at being honest and telling you exactly how they feel, but in a really polite way, where it's just going, no, I don't want to, and everyone's like, oh no, that's fine, you don't want to. So like my son came to work with me, and he wasn't feeling very well, so he wasn't at school. He came to the office. Someone in our office has got they have like surplus stock for like Hasbro, and they were like, he can come pick some toys. So he picked like these Star Wars toys, but initially when he went into the office, the really nice kind of man who was like letting him choose, like showed him this really cool Spider-Man toy. He was like, how about this Spider-Man toy? And he was like, I'm okay, thank you, I like Star Wars. And he went, he's polite. And I was going to go, just say yes, because there's but he said no in a polite way. And then they got some Star Wars toys, and it was fine. And in my head, like, there's a cultural thing where like you should just be polite, and even if you don't want it, you should just be polite because someone's offered it to you. But I like it more here because like you're less like the British thing of like suppress your feelings, just do whatever is polite, do whatever is the most compliant societal way of dealing with that situation, versus just be honest about how you feel, but you can be nice about being honest. Like, so when he said no thank you, that was a perfectly fine response, but I was like so subconsciously going, no.
Say yes, for God's sake.
Exactly. I think getting used to that, I think I still really struggle with it, because you have that thing to just go along, just to be polite, whereas I really envy the fact that people are able to just go, do you know what, I don't want to, and I'm sorry, but I just don't want to. And people will go, okay. So it's a good skill.
That's funny. It just reminds me of like, yeah, I definitely agree. We have a polite way here, but I remember when we were traveling, we were in. You're thinking the same thing. Yeah, we
I was
were
thinking
in
of the same story.
Yeah, we were in the Netherlands, and the Dutch are extraordinarily blunt. So I don't remember exactly what happened, but we were at we were basically walking through this like market, and we stumbled across like this shoe. I guess shoemaker, shoe seller, whatever, and he had like a bunch of different shoes laid out really nicely, and most of them had like the prices right in front of them, and so I found like we both saw this one pair that we really liked, and so I asked the guy, I was like, "There's a price beside it," and I was like, "Are these only like 20 euros?" And then I can't remember exactly.
And then he literally looks at us and he said, "If you can find me those for 20 euros, then they're yours." And we're like, "Holy shit!"
Yeah.
It's like, okay,
Yeah.
But it's like he said it in like this, like there was no smile or anything.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
like we kind of were taken back. We're like, did I just like offend this person?
Yeah.
But he was completely fine.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like he was like after that he kind of like joked about it, but like we were both like, wow, like what just happened here?
But the funniest one to me too was we got a tour around Amsterdam.
Yeah.
And our tour guide, she wasn't from the Netherlands. I think she actually was from the UK. But her partner was Dutch, and she's a little bit heavier set, and she said she told the story because and this was before we went to the marketplace. We hadn't really had an experience with that Dutch sort of bluntness, and so she was talking about like her they wanted to go out one night, and she like tried this dress on, and the classic like, "Hey, do I look fat?" And then he just looked at her and went, "Yes." he just goes, "I love you, but yes." I was like, "Oh my god!"
It's like, this is new.
I have never encountered this before.
Culture clash.
Yeah.
And that was like our first day in the Netherlands. So we were like, oh, this is gonna be an interesting one.
Yeah, this will be an interesting trip here.
Have you ever been to the Netherlands?
No, I do actually. I've driven through there without stopping on the way to. I think it was on my way to Germany, but I've never actually stopped and been to Amsterdam. But I've been to like Belgium next door, which doesn't count. But that was the closest I've been, I guess, where I spent any quality time. So.
That's actually funny. It's the opposite of us. We actually drove through Belgium.
Oh, really? Yeah.
And then, but stopped in the Netherlands.
Belgium is just one big traffic jam most of the time.
Oh, really?
I mean, it's a beautiful country, but there's a lot of highways from other European countries that run through. So
Everybody just skips Belgium on their way somewhere else.
The only reason like I wanted to stop there. Have you ever seen the movie In Bruges? With Colin Farrell.
yes,
Right,
yeah.
That's I wanted to stop in Bruges, but
Bruges is beautiful.
that's what I've heard. Yeah.
It's really incredible, but it's one of those things where it's one of those European places that is like really old, really beautiful, but so full of kind of tourists and tourist groups and everything like that. It's like, you go to Paris and it's full of tourists, and it's one of those places. And I kind of, it's finding those hidden places where you don't have like all the bus stores. Those are usually the best places, I think. But you do find that like when you go, those European places as well really struggle with all those people because they were like designed for like people walking or on a horse, and you've got like all these coach parties arriving and it's like all jammed together. So
Isn't it always like funny how, as a tourist, you always complain about other tourists?
yeah, exactly.
I know. You're like, oh my god, there's so many other tourists here.
Well, I think you're literally a part of the problem. It's like you're there trying to see the Eiffel Tower, just like everybody else, but you're like, but I'm gonna pick a different angle because I'm not them.
Exactly. We did I remember so we had 2 kids at the time, and my wife was pregnant with our third, and we drove from the UK to Austria. But we'd stop in different places. Like we'd stopped in like, we drove through Switzerland, and like, we did like a proper road trip and everything like that. But I always found that like, because we did go through all these small towns and everything as well. I always found that was fun because you always felt like you were going places where it was just people, just normal life, and it wasn't like curated to tourists. I always like those experiences because you're just kind of going, they're just being themselves in their own country and not like trying to like sell a tour or anything like that. And those bits are fun, but then also at the same time, there's some things you just have to see that are touristy. Like I did the CN Tower with my kids. I was like, I can't go to Toronto and not do the CN Tower.
It's like at least once.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean,
exactly.
Enough, we went to Toronto in July and like been there before. Ben was born
there, yeah. So,
but we still want to go see the CN Tower. It's like it's been a while. It's like if we're here and it's been like a few years, it's like we probably should go back just to see what it's like, re-experience the city again. Do you have you traveled a lot throughout your life?
I think mainly I did a lot in Europe because it was it was cheap to get around. Once you're in Europe, it's cheap to go anywhere in Europe pretty much. So like lots of like Western Europe. When I was like 8. So I was 8 in 1992. There was it wasn't long after the Iron Curtain had come down, and I went on an exchange trip as a scout, like a Cub Scout, lived in like a wooden shack in the forest with some other scouts in it's Czechia now, but it was still Czechoslovakia or Czech Republic at the time, so we had to go through Germany through the border crossing, and that was really interesting. It was like a post-Cold War cultural exchange, and they came over to us as well. That was kind of a really interesting to go there at that time as well. Was like really interesting because it was obviously still a very different place because they'd been like part of the Warsaw Pact for God knows how long. So, and then me and my wife, when we were in our mid-20s, we'd been saving money up to buy a house or a deposit for a house, and we decided that we weren't ready. We were like, I'm not ready to be a grown-up, and we just did like a month-long road trip across the western US.
Second best option.
Yeah, exactly. So we kind of we had a good time. We flew to San Francisco, and then we drove down, and we did like the length of California down from San Francisco, and we drove out into the desert and Grand Canyon and Arizona and Utah and all these cool places. So that was fun. And then for our wedding, we got married in Banff, and then
that's cool.
We road tripped to Vancouver, and then we did. I'm not a cruise person, but it is the only way you could really see all these places. But we did a cruise up into the Inside Passage in Alaska, and that was amazing.
That's actually funny. On our last podcast, we had a guy who's a wedding photographer.
Oh, really?
He's from the UK.
Yeah.
And for one of his jobs when he was younger, he was working on a cruise that also went, I think, to the exact same.
Oh, really?
Same route.
Really?
He mentioned Antarctica at least. So.
Well,
Antarctica, not Alaska.
Oh, yes. Never
that's
mind.
That's the other way.
Why are you guys looking at each other?
But it was funny when we got on the ship. The immigration person was like, "Do you just get married?" I was like, "Yeah." He was like, "Because everyone on this ship is either newlyweds or nearly deads." But it was amazing. Like I'm not a cruise person. I don't like the kind of, I don't know, I found that people were quite rude to the staff, but also like the staff were all like, I think they were all from like Indonesia. So you had like Indonesian staff and then like just white tourists being rude to them. And it was like a really visually, it was just, I found that upsetting.
Yeah, it's not a good vibe. Like.
No, it's not. But we had an amazing time, and like to see all those little small towns in Alaska. I don't know how we would have done it without being on the boat and everything like that. So it was incredible. So I've been quite lucky with that, and then like with work, again Europe and places too. But and then one of the weirdest experiences I had was we were filming Rod Gilbert's work experience. And we'd filmed with the Army, we'd filmed with the Air Force, where they'd actually let him fly a fighter jet, and then the Navy were like, "How come you haven't done us yet? He can like drive a warship." So we went out to sea and on a frigate for a few days and like slept in the bunks and like ate with the crew, and
That's really
that was really cool. That was a good
That's
place
really
to be.
cool.
So
That is
it's a
really
really
cool.
weird world to kind of drop in as a civilian with no military experience to then just be on a ship with all these military people. Like it was fascinating.
Send some photos to your wife. She's like, "Where are you?"
Yeah,
Just
wait,
with
what are
some
you doing?
friends.
Yeah.
We wanted to get a GoPro shot of the ship leaving the port. So we were like, can we clamp a GoPro on the front of this warship? So they were like, yeah, if you climb up this ladder and go on there, there's a really good angle up there. I'm sure you can do it. But he was like, whatever you do, don't step on those plastic domes. I was like, what are they? They were like, they're warheads. It was like literally just like a box of warheads, but they would like shoot out. And I had to walk, like step in the gaps in the middle, put the GoPro on, get the angle right, like check my phone with the Wi-Fi, and then climb back down again.
It's like worth the shot.
Yeah.
It's like I like said to Nathan, I was like, you can go and get that. I'm not going back up there.
Yeah.
One for one.
I'm too clumsy.
Wow, that's really cool though. How long do you spend there? Was it just the night?
It was like 3 days, I think, in total. But then they extracted us off the. We left port with them, but then they weren't willing to go into port to drop the camera crew off because we like weren't that important in the grand scheme of things. So they had a ship come side by side, and we did like a moving extraction
That's
with
cool.
all a camera kit and everything. So
What
it was like- it
what
was
was
cool.
the food situation like?
The food was amazing.
Wait, really?
Honestly, the food was incredible. So they had like old school Navy people and this younger generation, and they were like the older generation want like greasy comfort food, and the younger generation want healthy food. So they do healthy food, unhealthy food, alternate each day, so that everyone to try and keep everyone happy. But honestly, I couldn't believe how how good the food was. Like it was good.
Was it like catering style, where it's like you kind of go like in a buffet where if you go and go and you kind of get whatever you want? Like how does
No,
that
you
work?
literally like there was like a hatch, and they would like pass out. There were like a few options, and you'd like say what you want. They'd pass it out, and you'd go and eat. It was
Interesting.
pretty cool.
Did you talk to any of the soldiers?
Yeah, no, we were just hanging out with everyone. It was pretty cool. When we filmed with the army, we were in the infantry battle training school. So they've got like whole towns that are fake that they practice like insurgents and all this kind of stuff in. And that was interesting because then we were like sleeping in the woods with them. And it was like you weren't allowed to light a fire because they'll give you position away. And we were there just as like people, as camera crew. And these people were doing like intense. They'd been like kept awake for 4 days just to like really put the pressure on them. And they were like professional soldiers who were being tested because they were trying to like get new. They were essentially trying to increase their ranks and things by going to this infantry school. And we were there with cameras like filming. It was
Taking your 8-hour nap.
Exactly. And at one point, like. We fell asleep and then woke up, and like we just had a sleeping bag in a hole. That was like the accommodation we were sleeping in. They didn't bother putting tents up. They were like, you just get in your bag and you sleep in, find somewhere out of the wind. And I remember waking up and it snowed on my face. So
Oh my
like,
god.
I was like, this is why I'm just here. I'm glad I'm just here for a few days. Like, so.
Well, it's kind of cool because you kind of get to sample all these different experiences without necessarily having to dive into the worst parts of them.
Exactly. It was like just drop you into different worlds for a few days. Like we went down a mine. Like we went, he was a drag artist, or he was like, a garbage man, and all these different things. Like some of them were like every day. Some of them were a bit more extreme, like and a bit kind of, harder worlds to break into. But it was a real privilege to be dropped in. We actually got one episode, him to be a wedding planner, and like this couple let him like be the wedding planner.
Oh, and
I always
did it
remember
turn out well?
the father of the bride like having a quiet word with us, going, "You better not mess up my daughter's wedding for your TV show."
Did it turn out well?
It turned out well in the end. Yeah, we did have like a shadow kind of wedding planner just to make sure that we didn't fuck up too badly.
Yeah,
So it was
I was about to say.
it's too important. But I mean, yeah, it was that was a fun episode.
I can just imagine you're like, we don't have the cake.
No,
It's like-
exactly.
I think we missed something big. I don't remember what it is.
What do you think like was the which episode surprised you the most in terms of maybe the difficulty of the job?
I think.
Yeah, what's the hardest job?
Do you know what? I think the first episode we ever did was he was a bin man, which is garbage man, I guess. And in the UK is different than here because And I actually, it's probably closer to like a more built-up city. I'm thinking out in the burbs where I live, but they walk like 7-8 miles a day, and in any weather, people typically don't treat them very nice because they're slowing the traffic down and they beep at them, and like people sometimes race past them too close, and people aren't aware of them, even though and that's what they do every day. They're out collecting, and also like people assume they got paid well, and the ones we were with, they didn't. There wasn't like a really good paycheck or anything. So I think a lot that one was the one that surprised me the most, because it was a lot harder and a lot more dangerous than expected. But even then, like, they're clearing out bags that you don't know what's in there. There could be needles. Is actually quite a dangerous, thankless job, but everyone just expects it to get done. And like Rod's thought at the end was that everyone should have to do it for one day, but then never have to do it again as a job, which I thought was quite a nice thought.
Honestly, it's kind of interesting, because if you ever like implemented a rule like that, but it's like you alternate, like people cannot do it at the same time.
Exactly.
It's like
Exactly.
like everybody just like kind of takes a turn, and then like people are born again, and it's like by the time they're like 18, they can get there one day, and that'd be interesting. Not that I want to try it.
No, I know. It's a tough job.
But yeah, be interested. Like, I mean, obviously, this is a relatively new podcast. You're actually our 10th episode, so congratulations.
we made it to 10 episodes.
Double figures. Yeah.
That's good.
It's like how many podcasts actually make it to 10 episodes?
I think like the average is like 3 or 4 episodes. Is like
we made it to 2 last time, so
yeah. I think it's like only 20% of podcasts make it past their first year.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's
a high
totally
kill
makes
rate.
sense.
Yeah.
So if you were to give like, I don't want to spoil your business here, but if you had to give some like a little bit of advice maybe to people who are just starting to pursue a podcast, what would you tell them?
I'd say that, like, first and foremost, what you're talking about and why you're talking about it has got to be really strong in your head, because if you want, so like my show, we just hit 250 episodes, and it's because the only reason you can get that far is by really having fun, getting the right kind of chemistry, and like being really into what you're doing. And I think that, and also if you start to build an audience, that kind of keeps you going. So even when you're feeling a bit kind of worn out, and you've got people like reviewing or emailing you to say they enjoy the show, you're like, I'll do another one. You kind of need to build that momentum. But it's not just about like longevity. It's not just about you going, well, I want to be able to do 100 episodes, so I need passion for this. I need to be really into what I'm doing. It's because when people listen to your podcast as well, like, it's such an authentic medium that if you're not buying it, if you're not buying your idea and why you're there, then the audience won't either. So if you've got an idea where you're passionate and you're having good conversations with people who care about the same thing, regardless of the topic and the length of the show and all those other things and your artwork, if that spark isn't there, then you can't expect anybody else to kind of come along for the ride. So the key thing is like getting that chemistry right, getting that purpose right is the core of any kind of podcast, really. That people think that often think about microphones and should I do a YouTube version, and my art, I heard that blue artwork is better than green artwork, and this font over that font, and like they're completely missing the point, because you could literally just do it on your phone. But if like the podcast concept and your reason you're doing it is amazing, you will find an audience regardless of how you're producing it.
Wow. So there you go. There you go.
You heard it from the professional.
Yeah.
And that's often hard though, because like before I did Canadian Politics is Boring, I'd have like a new episode. I knew I wanted to do a podcast with Jesse, because whenever we hung out together, or we were working together, but we had to shut the door because we were just laughing so hard. I don't know what it is. He's got this insane laugh, and like there's a part of me that just is like, I need to make him laugh again. And then like Jesse's got his own weird perspective on the world, and like goes on these big rants that people like. And I always knew that we should do something, because we always just had such a good time, even if it was the most boring situation. And and then we were coming up with lots of podcast ideas and trying to like, we should do a podcast on this, we should do a podcast on that. And then I said, we should do one on politics. And then Jesse was like, I hate politics. And I was like, we should definitely do a podcast on politics, because that's perfect. Because your emotional reaction to me even suggesting it was was brilliant. So, that's how we kind of why we went down that route then as well. And I think that's it, because like it's finding something that is going to get people thinking or excited or disagreeing with or agreeing with or laughing at or animated at. And regardless of like what content you're doing, whether it's video or anything, the gold standard is to make people feel something. It could be laughing, it could be crying, it could be anger, it could be inspiration, and I think that podcasting is the same. So like, gravitate towards those topics, and just do something that is worth talking about, if you know what I mean. So that's usually the battle.
I have one last question for you.
That's fine. Yeah.
So your podcast, your personal podcast, gets about 50,000 listeners or 50,000 downloads a month
On a good month.
Yeah. Which is crazy for a podcast. How did you ever feel, or do you feel like you made it in the podcast world? It's like, what is it like knowing that you have this many people tuning in to something that you were saying?
I find it bizarre, but at the same time, like, it's kind of weird, because you eventually realize it's not a one-way conversation. You kind of build a community around the show, so you get to know, like, our Instagram and our Twitter, we're not promoting our show, we're just having a conversation with our listeners. It's more of a tool for us to kind of like share news and updates and all those things. And then the Patreon is like for those super insiders, people who are really into it. And you realize that like you have to factor in that community, and they're the biggest part of the equation. They're choosing to listen to us. They're choosing for us to be part of their commute or their walk, or how they relax, which is a hell of a lot of pressure. But at the same time, you want to treat them well. You want to look after them, and you want them to kind of still enjoy the show. And you want them to you want to surprise them. You want to kind of celebrate what you kind of essentially have built with them, I suppose. So it's I think when podcasters treat an audience, like it's a one-way conversation, they don't have to factor it. It's kind of not true to how podcasting originally developed and where some of the kind of smarter podcasts are going. And I think that, knowing that there are people like listening that like know us and all the stuff we talk about with our lives and everything else that we do, it kind of creeps me out sometimes. Because like if someone came up to me and was like, I've listened to every episode, I'm like, they know me. I don't even know who you are, but you obviously know me.
You know me probably weirdly well. Like
we're talking for hours.
Yeah.
But at the same time, but then you realize you have a platform, and then when you have a platform, you have an opportunity to kind of talk about. Sometimes you can talk about important stuff. The ratio we kind of work to is like dick joke, dick joke, dick joke, interesting fact, dick joke. So it's mainly just messing around and having fun. But every once in a while, we can put like something important in there, or something thoughtful that people should think about. And like there's tons of stuff you can kind of shove down people's throats and preach at them these days, but we try and weave it into like just two people having fun, and then hopefully they'll like take away a little bit of something from it, I guess.
Well, I think that's great too. Just because I think that, I'm sure you've probably talked about this on your podcast, but it's very difficult for people with two like opposing viewpoints these days to have a rational and meaningful conversation. So I think like being able to mix in those deeper things that you want to think about within some humor, like that's kind of like how a real life friendship kind of works, right? Like it is dick joke, dick joke, dick joke, something more thoughtful, dick joke, dick joke. Like that's like friends, right? Like that's how it goes. So I think doing that in a way like where and mixing in those meaningful things is really beneficial to your audience, because you're showing them that it's like you can still talk about this stuff. Like it's okay to whether you agree or disagree with me, like we can have this conversation and we can do it in a lighthearted way and still be friends afterwards.
And that's the thing, I think, like me and Jesse, we tend to lean more center-left just instinctively. But when we have people say that they're conservative or libertarian, or like that they disagree with us a lot, but they still like to listen and have fun, I'm like, that's such a win, because that to me is the opposite of an echo chamber. They might not like agree with everything we say or how we see the world, but because we're having fun, they can still like go, oh, I would like you to be my neighbor or my friend, even though I don't agree with you. And that's what we've kind of lost a bit. So like for me, that's like the ultimate goal. If we can do more of that, like then we're winning, I think. So
Yeah, totally. And anything that you want to plug?
oh yeah, CanadianPoliticsIsBoring.com. Sorry, I said that really fast. CanadianPoliticsIsBoring.com is the show we were just talking about. And then also, if you are interested in a podcast strategy, Podstarter.io is the business where we do all the real work that isn't comedy shows. So.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thanks so much for coming on, and hopefully we'll have you on again. Thank you for listening to our conversation with Rhys Waters. To support the podcast, please consider subscribing below and liking the video. And finally, I'll leave you with this quote from Winston Churchill. Success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts. Thank you again for listening. We hope to see you next time.